intellectual property, or IP, as it's better known. And this is something that I think has really gotten a pass, a free pass politically. And even though it's exceptionally important. And why is it important to someone politically minded? Just the sheer amount of money that it actually creates. When we talk about just exports, intellectual property makes more than food, makes more than agriculture, more than automobiles, more than aviation. So we're talking about millions of jobs and a pretty high percentage of our GDP. It is the only sector that is growing besides the service sector, which is of course finite. And yet, only now did any president appoint IP czar, and this is still a topic that doesn't get discussed in presidential debates or not even in town hall meetings or State of the Union addresses. So this is, something that is a bit of a gray area so far as libertarian thought is concerned, and I think rightly so, and in particular in regards to patents. And a patent is essentially a state-enforced monopoly for a process or product for a period of 20 years. What that doesn't mean is any kind of guarantee of success. It's not even a guarantee, actually, that you can produce whatever it is that you got patented because some other part of whatever it is might actually be patented. All it is the ability to restrict other people from using whatever it is you patented, whether process or product, without permission. So it is by its nature, it stymies competition. So that has to be measured against the money and time and labor that go into whatever it is the actual patented process. It always has to be weighed against whatever it takes to incentivize that sort of innovation. So what is the foundation in the Constitution? It's actually really simple, as it is for other facets of intellectual property, and that is a really short line, paraphrasing here, essentially that Congress can make laws to ensure the progress of science and useful arts by limiting or by ensuring for a limited time the right to those respective inventions or creations, whatever it is. So essentially it's to incentivize. It isn't to guarantee anybody any profit. It is simply to incentivize, and that's definitely the lens through which I want to look at several patent processes. So there are a couple of historical examples, I think, that provide, one will be a really good pro, I think, and one a really good con so far as whether or not it acts as an incentive. And one historical con, definitely, excuse me, would be regarding the steam engine. Now, who invented the steam engine? Good job. Why? Right. Except it didn't actually. But that's, a lot of things that where you think someone invented it, actually, maybe they just came up with a popular design. That was Watt's case, is he came up with a popular design, one that was better than it was at the time. And this was around 1760s, and he put all the time and the effort and energy into creating the Watt steam engine without the understanding that he was going to get a patent. Actually, patents were exceptionally hard to get back then. The only reason he got it is because he had a buddy who was capable of lobbying Parliament very heavily. It took very many years, and by 1769, finally, he got a patent. And he actually got subsequent patents protecting other facets, anything steam engine related, essentially, to where then he had protection for 31 years, a typical amount of time, certainly. So what did that mean for that 31 years? Well, the number of steam engines went from about 500 to 2,200. But he spent that 31 years not making a better design, but rather ensuring that no one else could improve upon his design. There were actually improvements to the design, and through heavy litigation, actually had people jailed over improving on his design. So during this 31 years, there was very little in the way of actually improving. He had several goals that he wanted to achieve that other people were achieving, that he did nothing but try and stymie those progressions, basically. And of course, this went to 1800, 31 years after 1769. And what happened immediately after the patent expired is suddenly there's an explosion in steam engine technology. There's all these different innovations and all these improvements upon design. It's not a coincidence, obviously. It was people just waiting for the patent to expire. So all these years, people are sitting on improvements. The moment the patent expires, they release those improvements. And what happens over the next 15 years is the number of steam engines increases by a factor of 3. So that, I think, and two, it's not as if Watt was making any money on licensing. He actually wasn't approving licensing. He solely wanted every steam engine to be Watted. So he didn't even become exceedingly wealthy off of this. But there are those that theorize that his actions alone, just stopping the steam engine essentially, or not allowing for a better steam engine, I should say, stymied the Industrial Revolution by 10 to 20 years. And that's a pretty significant feat if you think about that. So that's one example, I think, where, I don't know if the patent actually, granted this is the UK and in the US it's all about incentivizing, but our views on patents contemporaneously are pretty similar. Where I don't know that it was about incentivizing. You think he didn't even expect to get a patent, and he put all that time and energy and research into it, not even knowing that he was going to have that exclusivity. And yet there's another example. Excuse me for a second. Another historical example, I think, is definitely on the other side. And that is in the late 16th, early 17th century, there was a guy, a French Huguenot, a doctor who practiced in London by the name of Chamberlain. And Chamberlain was an OB, he delivered babies, and at the time, the highest cause of death for women and babies was the actual childbirth. This had a lot to do with infection, obviously, pre-germ theory, all these problems, but a lot of those infections came from obstructed birth, what we would now very quickly and concisely treat with a C-section. Back then, there was just not a whole lot they could do for breech, or if the child was stuck in the pelvis, or any of those things. When a bag of water erupts, every hour thereafter is an exponential increase of infection, and therefore they were dying, left and right. And the woman's life back then was more important than the baby's. Often it also ended in aborted children in order to save the mother. Well, this Chamberlain actually came up with a way to use a tool to turn and maneuver the baby in such a way that it could then be pulled out. What we know now is forceps. So it was the tool, but it was also the process, because even now, those who use the forceps would say it's just as much art as it is science and how they were used. Well, he had this processing product. He knew how valuable it was. So what he did is he kept it as a secret. There was no patent law at the time. So when he was using it, he would actually kick everyone else out of the room and put a blanket over himself in order to perform his magic underneath the blanket, whatever it was he was doing. And of course, his reputation soared, and so did his patients. And even to the point where he knew what this was worth, so he passed it on to his son, and only his son, who passed it on to his son, who passed it on to another man, who ended up dying with him. So the person that people believe is the inventor of the forceps is actually Smellie, Dr. Smellie of London, in the middle 1800s. So we're talking 150 years without the technology and the process that could save lives. So what was the cost of that? It just, in the basic math, was millions of lives. And imagine that millions of lives were the cost of not releasing this technology and this process. So would a working patent system have permitted that? Would it have said, if 20 years you have the exclusive right to sell these forceps in whatever design you have, and also the only guy to instruct people in the process, or whatever it is, some sort of monopoly over this for a period of 20 years certainly would have made him exceedingly wealthy, more wealthy, I believe, than any reputation and therefore turnover of patients would have made him. So, that's a good example of how possibly patent law could operate. And I think that, for instance, in one side of libertarian ideals would be like Ayn Rand's view in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, where she talks about patents. I think that's more what she's talking about. That is incentivizing someone who puts the time and the energy, and that's the reason they're putting in the time and the energy and the research, and a unique idea. I mean, obviously, now, there's a great idea for every billion people every year. If you think historically, it makes sense that you only had so many great ideas. Now they're all over the place. But if you think about it, obviously it is possible to have an idea that someone simply is not going to come up with vis-a-vis the forceps, right? So I think she's looking at it from that perspective, and that is why, even to the point of exclusivity, she's arguing that someone should have those rights. Even though now, with more contemporary libertarians such as Stefan Kinsella and others, they are arguing certainly the other side, that is, that it is essentially a tax on creation, that it is inefficient. But these are also very different times. And that is, even when she wrote that, right about that time, the United States gave protection for processes instead of just products. And at the time, it meant something very industrial. It meant an industrial process. But I think the process part of patents is really what has not perverted and leads to some real questions as to whether or not patents are even incentivized any longer. And a great example for that is patents in software. Software patents are for a process, and that is the outcome of whatever the program is doing. So it's not the code itself. That actually does enjoy some trade secret protection, but it also enjoys some copyright protection, arguably arbitrary, because if you have a closed source code, you know, no one's going to get the source code office. And if you have open source code, you're probably not really concerned with so many copies and paste. So it is the outcome that enjoys that, that protection. This is very recent. Technically, there was some manner of protection since 1981, but really it's been since the mid to late 90s that this has taken effect by some real tricky use of the appellate courts in dealing with process patents. And what is the outcome? The outcome now is that software patents are 25% of all patents, and that's only increasing. This was in the late 90s. So by now, it's probably an even higher number. You know, a third of all patent cases are software patent cases. 40% of all litigation is for software patents. So this is, you know, 3,500 patents are filed every week in the USPTO, and that's, you know, what, 1,000 of those or 900 of those, then by that logic would be software patents. So the thing to ask is this incentivizing creation? If it's from the late 90s on, and now, you know, 900 every week, and now what's that added up to is 200,000 software patents. Has it really incentivized creation? Well, think about what occurred before then, not so much what occurred after then. Before then, you had Office suites, you had a spreadsheet word processor, the Internet Explorer, I should say the browser, Internet browser, the Internet itself. All of these things came about without any kind of patent protection at all. So what has happened since then, however, are, you know, you hear about outlier cases, of course, in cases of patent trolls. In gaming, it works the same way. It's considered a program. You know, an arrow pointing over a car in a game where there's racing, pointing the car where to go. That is owned by a company that hasn't made games in a long time, and they're still either suing people or collecting royalties from Simpsons Road Rage, Need for Speed, anybody who wants to put a pointing arrow, even though I think that, you know, patents have to be new, useful, and non-obvious. I think that kind of ranks as obvious, but I'm not the one approving them. But point of fact, when you have 900 a week, there are plenty that are going to slip through. So is that really incentivizing anything? But instead, more likely with software creation now, it's more of a tax. And most creators actually look at it as about a 10 to 20% range of what their costs are going to be are paying off for some kind of litigation involving patents. And a lot of that is too, I mean, if someone has a frivolous case, you can always countersue, but all that is a lot of time and very costly. The only person that benefits are patent lawyers. So most of the time it's just settle. Well, the big guys got tired of settling, so they end up doing their own patent grabs. So now it's essentially just, you know, again, each person settling with this company, and then a good, they consider, or at least they're coached by their patent lawyers, that a good defense is a good offense. And so they're using the same kind of logic to go and sue others. So, you know, it would be hard-pressed to look at software and say whether patents in that case are actually incentivizing anything. But patents in software don't really, what kind of deleterious effect does that have on people? Instead, let's move to something like pill patents. So pill patents, I could talk for hours and hours on pharmaceutical patents, and people have really polemic opinions when it comes to that, or is it good, is it bad? Point of fact is that, despite being, fifth leading cause of death in America because of adverse drug reactions and all these problems, I think pills still have increased the quality of life, and they've done amazing things. So the important question is then, are patents actually incentivizing this? So, as you know, obviously it's a very expensive process. You have to do the research and the development and all these things, and you have to look at that and say, well, am I going to make any money off of this? I need some sort of certainty to make money. But the reality is that the answer might be sort of, because 80% of new pills being presented are what's called Me Too pills. And that is, it's just a replication of what has already come before. So an example being Claritin. Claritin comes out and it treats allergies. And then some other drug companies say that was put out by Eli Lilly, I'm not sure who put it out. And Pfizer says, no, me too, I want to be in on that. So they put out something else that does exactly the same thing. They change it around enough, or they might even change the name of the disease, whatever it is, in order to enjoy it on the patent. So this also applies too for pills you already had where the patent is running out, and you simply have to rename the disease. There were something like 20 names for anxiety disorder because the patent law stipulates that if you can prove that your pill works to treat something else, if it once treated anxiety and it can be proven it treats depression, then you get a re-up of your patent. So, that's what essentially falls into that 80%. A great example being restless leg disorder, restless leg syndrome, I think it's called, and that is just to essentially glob a bunch of sort of catch-all symptoms together and patent a pill for it, even if it's a pill that you've already owned and the patent ran out on, and then suddenly you're the only one able to treat this disease because it was a fabricated disease. And so this has happened. Another great example is with Seraphim. Seraphim was used to treat, I think it was PMDD, post-menstrual dystopic disorder or something like that. I forgot exactly what it stood for. But essentially, again, this is sort of the PMS symptoms. If you think you're suffering from this, ask your doctor. It's Seraphim. Seraphim came out right when Prozac lost the patent. And generic Prozac came about 10 seconds afterwards, of course. So essentially what it was is just Prozac repackaged and now treating a new disease, therefore you get another patent. You get the idea. But point of fact, the question needs to be asked that was patent in that case really necessary? So let's say that for Seraphim's a great example of this. Was it really necessary to sell to people or have exclusivity in order to sell this? If someone's willing to buy something, if someone is willing essentially to buy a disease, if they're saying, yes, that sounds like me, I think I might have that disease, and you put out enough of an advertising campaign and you put it in their face enough, point of fact, they're probably going to buy the pill just because you're first to market. Of course you're first to market, you make the disease. So were patents actually needed in this case? So what does all this mean for overseas, for instance? So would this work for, say, medications in countries that need more base medicines, anti-malarials, anti-AIDS, and things of that nature? Because Pfizer, like for example, Pfizer spends 80% of their time on that which they can patent, not which already is in public domain, for lack of a better word, that which has generics. So, and that includes anti-malarial and anti-AIDS medication. So, a good example of this, though, is whether or not the patent system, as we currently have it in a post-industrial nation, in a third world country such as 60s India. So what happened in India in the late 60s was Indira Gandhi, in order to try and boost economic development in agriculture and medicine, said that patents would no longer cover products. They can cover process, but they can't cover products. And her intended result certainly came true, and that is that at the time, and I think thereafter, around about 60% of our medicine was made there.
So, and a lot of our pesticides and things of that nature were also made. There are a lot of chemicals. So naturally what happened was the Indian people reverse engineered all that and pirated all of it and then created their own generics in order to give their own people. Now this is not to be confused with Chinese current market of fake pharmaceuticals. That's entirely different. That's actually harmful through inaction. That's harmful through not having active ingredients. And that's, that's not the same as being organic and homesteaded. It's sent to America, UK, and Africa, and that's very different than a reverse engineered pill. Pirate pill, different than a reverse engineered pill, even though they're colluded all the time to, essentially make any kind of patent violation seem harmful. But the Indian, it was perfectly legal for Indians then to put out all these bills and make all these advancements in agriculture by not respecting patents, and they wouldn't be able to afford anything that actually was at a premium because of having an active patent. What happened over decades was their economy boosted, their illnesses went down, became self-sufficient with agriculture and all these things. And then finally, in 2005, they added products back to, through pressure largely through us, back to their list of things that would respect in patents. It's way too early to tell what the result of that will be. But this is an example of how that would occur overseas. And lastly, also having a human element to it when it comes to patents is food patents. And the big elephant in the room when it comes to food patents is Monsanto. It's kind of the Walmart of any kind of food patents, even though it's really recent. In 1994, they were able to patent Roundup Ready seeds, and this was essentially grew a crop that was resistant to Roundup, which is the most successful herbicide. And before this, you couldn't patent life, and you couldn't patent nature. But through heavy lobbying, they were able to patent life that was genetically modified. So they genetically modify the seed, and part of that was by being I forgot the word, but transgenic. There we go. Transgenic, part of what they did was they spliced with a certain bacteria, BT. And this bacteria would essentially kill any insect that tasted of it. So it was essentially both herbicide and pesticide in one with one pass of Roundup. So then they were able to patent it. And what happened, of course, subsequently is that Monsanto and DuPont as well bought up every seed company. Not every, I shouldn't say that, but they spent $8 billion gobbling up seed companies. And immediately when I heard this, I thought, well, what is this? What does this mean? Well, Monsanto, as a part of this, because they actually could patent the seed, it also meant that whatever seeds were created could not be reused the next year. So that is, if you planted Roundup Ready seeds, then whatever seeds came out of that you couldn't reuse. And I thought, well, how relevant is that? How much do they actually reuse anyway? There were already seed companies. Were they just buying all their seed anyway, so it's irrelevant that you couldn't reuse it? Not really. About 75% of all farmers now, granted this is worldwide, not US, relies on the majority of their seeds are reused seeds. In America, it fluctuated, but it sometimes reaches as high as 60%. So 60% will be your reused seeds, which was indeed a costly, labor-intensive process, but it was still cheaper than buying your seed. So that's the difference. 60%, 40% they would buy from these different seed companies that had no patents because they couldn't patent life. Well, Monsanto gobbled those up. They couldn't patent it, and you understand the problem with the math is 40% of your seeds come and you can't take any of those seeds and use them the next year, and you have 60% left over. Well, if only 60% of that you can use the next year, then you get the idea that the Monsanto seeds that you can't use over again are slowly going to take over any size crop. It's just the mathematical certainty. So that essentially evolved into you have to buy Monsanto. Now, there are all kinds of arguments about GMOs on one side or the other. There are pros and cons. Some of the pros essentially is it could ostensibly have a positive economic benefit, ecological benefit, because you're not using insecticides and because you're not tilling your soil in order to get rid of weeds, and therefore your soil can take on more water and you have less runoff and less soil erosion, et cetera, et cetera. Again, there are pros and cons on both sides. But I think the important question here again is, was patent acting as an incentive? And I thought about this, and I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure it had to. So here you have a chemical company, been around since 1902 with fabulous hits like DDT and Agent Orange. And at the time, generally regarded as safe, much as GMOs are now. But, point of fact, they were a chemical company. And they were able to engineer a seed that would not die using their pesticide. So the question is, did they have to have a patent for that? And after all, for them to have a deal with somebody and sell them seed is a matter of contract law. It's not a matter of copyright law. Certainly they can violate the copyright by, say, taking their seed and reusing it somewhere else or selling it to a neighbor, because that neighbor would then be infringing upon a patent. But if you're using your seed, that's a violation of contract. What the patent really did, unfortunately, was whenever those seeds cross-pollinated in any way, and the courts decided this, no matter how it was transmitted, the person who had any bit of Monsanto seed, therefore had plants that were owned by Monsanto. The seed equal ownership of the plant, essentially, no matter how it was cross-pollinated. So it ended up, they have a team of lawyers perpetually going out and inspecting fields and suing these farmers and et cetera. So what does this have to do with incentivizing? I think it's possible, certainly, that a chemical company able to create a seed that would only respect their herbicide would have been just as driven to make that seed, whether or not it had a patent or not. And then, certainly, if they were the one actually selling the seed, they were simply the one saying, well, hey, if you want to use ours, you can use this, and you're only killing the weeds, your seed's going to be safe, etc. Then, the farmers would have an incentive in order to buy those. And if they were the ones selling the seed as well, would there be any incentive to put in any kind of technology that said, there's passive technology right now for not reusing the seed, but it's mostly by litigation. But they even have an incentive to have litigation, not for their seeds. They only care about making the herbicide. And that would, what has to be brought up when it comes to Monsanto, and they claim that they are not going to follow up on this, even though years ago they bought the company that created it, even after they told the public they weren't going to follow up on it, is terminated technology. And that is essentially that not only when they sell the seeds can they not use them, they have a physical barrier using them because the seeds are sterile. The seeds absolutely can bear no more fruit after that first year. So they always have to return to the well, essentially. Again, they're not actually making these right now, but they own the company that creates them. So again, did patent law in this case incentivize the creation of that, or would this have come about organically from a company that still benefited greatly from a seed that didn't respond to the herbicide? So for all these examples, I just want to present the idea that by including process, by not having it solely to where it's products, by this essentially not necessarily growing term, but a growing girth of what is protected by a patent, is it the same as it once was? Is it operating the same way? Is it actually incentivizing? Thank you.